There is a borough outside Philadelphia that covers 1/10 of a square mile, smaller than most city parks. It packs in 18,000 people per the square mile. That is denser than Philadelphia, denser than San Francisco, denser than most neighborhoods in Manhattan below 96th Street. But on every map and in every census report, it is classified as a suburb. The Philadelphia region has an entire ring of these places, suburbs that are more urban than most American cities. And the reason traces back to a 19th century real estate scheme disguised as a transit system. If you want to understand how maps lie about where cities actually end, subscribe. To see how that scheme built the suburbs you would swear were a city, we need to start with the numbers. Millbourne Borough is not a one-off anomaly. It is the most extreme example of a pattern that repeats across Philadelphia's entire western and northern edge. Upper Darby Township sits just across Cobb's Creek from West Philadelphia. It has 85,000 residents, making it Pennsylvania's 6th largest municipality, bigger than Reading, bigger than Erie. Officially, it is a suburb. Its downtown at 69th Street is only 2.8 miles from Center City, Philadelphia, the same distance as neighborhoods that no one would hesitate to call part of the city. East Lansdowne and Darby Borough cluster around 12,700 to 12,800 people per square mile. Stretches of Cheltenham Township hit 10,000 per square mile, lined with high-rise apartments and row houses along Cheltenham Avenue in a streetscape that reads as fully urban from every angle. Walk across Cobb's Creek from West Philadelphia into Upper Darby and nothing changes. Same row houses, same storefronts, same bus pulling up to the same stop. The city ends on a map, but the street does not know it. Philadelphia is the only major American city where the county boundary and the city boundary are identical. There is no unincorporated buffer zone, no gradual thinning into cul-de-sacs and strip malls. One step across the line and you are standing in a suburb that looks, functions, and feels exactly like the city you just left. This is not one quirky borough. It is an entire ring of urban density wearing a suburban label. The obvious question is how farmland outside a city line turned into something denser than the city itself. The answer has two layers, and the first one predates the trolleys by decades. Before the developers, before the streetcars, industry arrived. 19th century mills and factories clustered along creeks in the Delaware River just outside Philadelphia's city limits. Places like Chester, Clifton Heights, and parts of Upper Darby. They needed workers housed within walking distance of the plant floor, so they built working-class street grids and dense housing from the very beginning. Small lots, tight blocks, corner taverns you could reach on foot from the factory gate. These were not suburbs in any modern sense of the word. They were industrial satellite towns with urban form baked into their bones from day one. The economics were simple. A textile mill running 2 shifts needed hundreds of hands, and those hands needed to live close enough to hear the morning whistle. So builders packed narrow row houses along streets that radiated outward from the factory like spokes from a hub. The smell of coal smoke and machine oil drifted over front stoops. Children grew up playing in the same alleys where their parents walked to work. The land outside Philadelphia's border was already being shaped by the same forces that built the city itself: proximity to work and the need to pack people close together. Factory owners did not care about the city line. They cared about getting bodies to machines, and that meant dense housing, narrow streets, and neighborhoods that functioned like extensions of Philadelphia's own working-class wards. By the time anyone thought to call these places suburbs, they already had the DNA of a city. But the real transformation came when a new technology made it profitable to extend that urban fabric outward on purpose, and on a scale the factory towns never imagined. Electric trolleys arrived in Philadelphia in 1892, and within 2 decades they had redrawn the map. By 1911, roughly 4,000 streetcars ran 86 routes across the region, their tracks radiating outward from the city center like the branches of a nervous system. The private traction companies behind them, the Philadelphia and Westchester Traction Company, Red Arrow Lines, were not just moving passengers. They were real estate operations disguised as transit companies. The playbook was elegant and ruthless. Buy farmland cheap at the edge of the city where land costs almost nothing. Lay track to it. Then subdivide the land into small lots and gridded streets around stations. Market the result as a streetcar suburb with pastoral imagery, fresh air, green lawns, the charm of country living. The advertisements promised escape from the cramped and smoky city. But the built form these companies actually constructed was something else entirely. Compact blocks, attached row houses, walkable main streets with shops at ground level. The brochure showed a cottage with a garden. The product was a Philadelphia row house with a trolley stop out front. In East Lansdowne, developers subdivided a 130-acre farm in 1902 into a tight residential grid served by the trolley line. Within a decade, it looked indistinguishable from the Philadelphia neighborhoods a few miles east. Lansdowne, Media, Upper Darby, all followed the same pattern. The trolley did not connect these suburbs to the city. It copy-pasted the city's physical form onto new land. This is the key to the entire story. The urban fabric that exists today in these communities is not an accident of later growth or gradual densification. It was the original product. The trolley companies built cities and called them suburbs because suburbs sold better than dense urban extension. Suburban trolley corridors to Media, Sharon Hill, and Norristown were completed between roughly 1906 and 1917, locking in corridors of compact, mixed-use development around stations that still define these places more than a century later. The trolley machine did not just shape a few neighborhoods, it stamped an entire ring of urban density around Philadelphia's western edge, and every mile of track was also a mile of city form exported beyond the city line. All of those corridors converged on a single point, and that point became the hinge between two worlds that were really the same world. The 69th Street Terminal in Upper Darby became the transit nexus where everything connected. Suburban trolley lines from Media, Sharon Hill, and Norristown fed into it from the west. The Market-Frankford elevated line ran east from it straight into Center City, Philadelphia. The terminal sat just 2.8 miles from downtown, closer than many neighborhoods that are unambiguously part of the city. That proximity, combined with the density of converging transit lines, pulled dense mixed-use development around it like gravity pulling matter toward a star. Shops, offices, restaurants, apartment buildings, all of it clustered around the terminal until Upper Darby's core became functionally indistinguishable from the Philadelphia neighborhoods across the creek. Commuters stepped off trolleys and onto the elevated without ever leaving the platform. The transfer was seamless, and so was the urban landscape on either side of it. A rider heading from Media to Center City passed through miles of continuous row house blocks without a single gap in the built fabric to suggest a city boundary had been crossed. 15 miles to the southwest, Media, the Delaware County seat, still has a trolley running down the center of its main street. One of the few towns in America where light rail operates at street level through a walkable downtown, tying it directly to the 69th Street hub. The terminal is the physical proof that these places were never separate from Philadelphia. They were Philadelphia's western rooms, connected by an unbroken corridor of steel rail and row house blocks. If you are enjoying this and want to see more on how geography shapes where Americans live, subscribe, and it helps more than you might think. But then something happened that tried to tear the whole system apart. After World War II, federal mortgage policy and highway construction funded a mass exodus to low-density car suburbs farther out. The FHA and the VA backed cheap mortgages for new construction in outer rings, places like Levittown and the townships stretching toward King of Prussia, while refusing to insure loans in older, denser neighborhoods closer to the city. The money flowed outward. Middle-class families followed it, lured by the promise of bigger houses, bigger yards, and the brand new highways that made the commute possible. Trolley ridership dropped. Lines were cut. SEPTA was created in 1963 to consolidate what was left, acquiring Red Arrow lines in 1970. But by then, decades of disinvestment had already hollowed out the inner ring communities. The highways were designed to make the outer suburbs possible. The trolley suburbs were collateral damage, not targeted for destruction, just starved of the investment that kept them alive. Main streets that had thrived on foot traffic and trolley passengers found themselves bypassed by drivers heading for the new shopping malls along the expressway. Storefronts emptied, buildings aged without renovation. Tax bases shrank as the residents who could afford to leave did so. But here is what the highways could not erase. The street grid, The row houses, the small lots, the main streets. The trolley companies had built their suburbs out of brick, stone, and concrete on tight lots platted for permanence. You cannot bulldoze a row house grid the way you can abandon a mine or close a factory. The physical skeleton of the trolley era survived intact even as the economy around it was gutted. Residents left, storefronts emptied, property values sagged, but the bones held. The built form was permanent, the policy was temporary, and that distinction would matter enormously when the next chapter arrived. The post-war exodus was not just about highways and mortgages. It carried something uglier with it, and it turned the word suburb itself into a disguise. As black residents and later immigrants moved into aging inner suburbs from adjacent Philadelphia neighborhoods, white households moved farther out. Communities like Upper Darby and Cheltenham became flashpoints over school funding, housing discrimination, and municipal services. This created a bitter irony. Places that looked, felt, and functioned like city neighborhoods were marketed as suburban, specifically to signal distance from the city's demographics. The label stopped describing built form and started performing identity. Suburb became a mask, not a statement about density or architecture, but about who was supposed to live there. The density did not care about the marketing. The transit corridors did not care. The walkable main streets kept functioning as walkable main streets regardless of what the real estate ads promised. These communities spent decades caught between what they physically were, urban neighborhoods, and what they were branded as. The mismatch created a kind of civic identity crisis, places that could not admit what they were because the word for what they were had been turned into a liability. Until a new wave of residents arrived who did not care about the label at all. Starting in the 2000s, a different generation found exactly what they needed in these places. New immigrants and younger residents priced out of gentrifying Philadelphia neighborhoods discovered affordable transit-rich communities with walkable main streets and dense housing stock, the exact qualities that urbanists now celebrate as best practice. They did not choose these places despite the density. They chose them because of it. Upper Darby became one of the most ethnically diverse communities in the entire Philadelphia region. Its 69th Street corridor filled with Vietnamese restaurants, West African groceries, and South Asian shops occupying storefronts that had sat vacant for years. Lansdowne's Main Street, shaded by mature trees and lined with independent shops and a 1927 movie palace, attracted residents who wanted urban life without urban prices. Cheltenham's apartment corridors drew families who needed transit access to jobs across the city without the cost of a center city address. The thing that had been treated as a liability for decades, the density, the tight lots, the old trolley corridors, the lack of parking, became the asset. What once drove people away now drew people in. The same physical form that streetcar companies built over a century ago turned out to be exactly what the 2020s housing market demands. Walkable, transit-connected, mixed-use neighborhoods at a price point that Center City Philadelphia can no longer offer. But there is a structural absurdity underneath all of this that nobody has solved, and it might determine whether these places thrive or slowly fall apart. Philadelphia's urban fabric does not stop at the city line. It stretches continuously across multiple counties and dozens of boroughs and townships, each with its own zoning code, its own school district, its own tax base, its own political interests. Millbourne Borough governs 1/10 of a square mile. East Lansdowne administers 130 acres. These are neighborhoods pretending to be governments. The greater Philadelphia metro area holds more than 5.4 million people and generates a GDP over $500 billion. But the inner suburban ring cannot coordinate on housing, transit investment, or land use because every fragment makes its own rules. SEPTA's Media Sharon Hill line is currently being upgraded, but decisions about what gets built around those stations, the density, the zoning, the housing types, are made by a patchwork of municipal governments with competing priorities and no obligation to agree. One borough might welcome denser development near a station while its neighbor directly across the street blocks it to protect property values. The de facto city and the de jure city are completely mismatched. One continuous urban organism governed by dozens of tiny jurisdictions that were drawn when the land was still farmland and the trolley had not yet arrived. Urbanists debate whether this fragmentation will eventually force consolidation or calcify into permanent dysfunction. Some nodes gentrifying while others stagnate, none of them able to plan at the scale their shared fabric demands. The future of these communities depends not on their physical form, which was settled a century ago, but on whether their political structure can catch up to reality. Stand at Cobb's Creek. Look east into West Philadelphia. Look west into Upper Darby. Same row houses, same sidewalks, same bus stops. The line on the map says you have left Philadelphia, but the trolley companies, the factory owners, the developers who subdivided those farms over a century ago, they did not build a boundary. They built a continuous city and drew an arbitrary line through the middle of it. Philadelphia did not stop at its border. It just changed its name. The suburbs that feel like a city feel that way because they are one. They always were. The map is the fiction. The row houses are the truth. The most honest thing you can say about Philadelphia's suburbs is that they are not suburbs at all. They are Philadelphia. They just do not know it yet. If that changes how you see cities, check out the videos on screen and subscribe for more.